everyone, it's Celia. Welcome back. Happy Wednesday to the father-daughter experience. Today we're going to be talking about how did we get here?
Yeah, so we thought a good way to start the podcast and start with one of the first episodes is to really give some background on, again, how we got here. Essentially starting with when I became a dad. Essentially, my wife and I, we met when we were in high school. And it's kind of one of those questions you get asked a lot, right? Just I think one of the things I usually get asked about you when people find out that you're my child and that you're so old is that typically what I get asked is, "Oh, that's like really great," and people awkwardly make a face and then they assume that like your mother and I are not together. That we're not still a couple. So usually I say like, "Oh yeah, my wife and I, we met in high school, and shortly thereafter we had my daughter." So yes, we are still together.
How many years?
So let's see. We have been together for 25 years, and we will be married for, it's our 20th anniversary next year in May. So a very long time.
I hope you're doing something really big and exciting for Mom.
We have some things in the works.
That's interesting.
That's the plan. That we want to do something special. We're not sure exactly what we're going to do yet. But your mother and I, we don't surprise each other very often. I think what we usually do is we usually talk through a lot of the things that we want to do. So
that's an episode for another time. Anyway, back to you and my mom. So where were you when you realized you were going to be a dad?
Okay, so fun fact, you were conceived in Italy.
I know that. Made in Italy.
Made in Italy.
I asked Mom that a long time ago. I was like, so I was made in Italy.
So bougie.
Gross.
So fancy. I mean, we're all conceived somehow and somewhere. It just so happens, a fun fact, that your entire generation, you and your cousins, were all conceived in Italy. But let's see. So your mother and I got pregnant when we were in Italy.
That's weird.
And your mother, took a pregnancy test and was, it would obviously, the way you go through pregnancy is you are kind of thinking you're going to be pregnant and you take a pregnancy test. And I remember at the time it was really, really funny because we had a really hard time finding and getting a pregnancy test.
In Italy.
And it was really strange. But eventually we got one. Your mother had the test and we found out. And when she told me, I'll never forget this. The first thing that I said was, it's going to be a girl. First words out of my mouth. It was like the first two thoughts I had were, one, it's going to be a girl. And then I don't remember if your mother said anything to me precisely after that, but I remember my second thought being like, I'm going to be such a good dad. There wasn't any fear for me at that moment. I don't know why. I was crazy about your mother. I loved her. I thought it was going to be awesome. And I remember like those were kind of my first two thoughts.
You're like, yeah, girl dad.
You have to understand my family. I am one of 4 children, 3 sisters, all girls. My mother has 2 sisters and a brother, so it's 3 girls and a boy. Just my family is lousy with the ladies. So I just knew there was no way that we were going to have
such a terrible phrase.
What do you say?
We're lousy with ladies here. Step right up.
Just so many women in my family. So no, it was one of those things where I just knew we were going to have a girl.
Cool.
Very cool. What else do you want to know?
What was it like when you held me in your arms for the first time?
So let's see.
Were you so overcome with emotion? You're like, oh my God, I made that thing.
I think, weirdly, I do this thing, and at some point we'll have to get your mother on and she'll verify or she'll, change my mind on my recollections. But when you were born, one, I was in the room, so I watched you being born.
Weird.
And people have, what's really funny is for some people it is weird because there is this debate over north of the equator or south of the equator. One of the shows that I listen to often is they have the conversation of, because they put up a curtain or a drape and the doctor is on one side and you are on another. And as the father, as a non-participant, as a support person, you can choose to either be at the top of the bed where your mother's head is, or you can be at the bottom where the doctor is doing his work and where you are going to emerge from. And so some people do not want to see that happen and other people such as myself,
Okay. Yeah.
I watched you be born.
Great.
And I remember thinking it was amazing and like crazy and just exhilarating and being like super excited. And when the nurse, they kind of sweep you away and they clean you up and then they bring you over, I remember holding you and feeling like super confident, like again, that it was just like, I'm made for this. Like I'm going to do a good job of this. Like I felt comfortable holding you. And I think your mother is more, I think she's more trepidatious than I am on certain things. And so I think for her, seeing me be really comfortable was one of those things that I think made her really comfortable. And I don't know, maybe she would tell you she loves me. She loved me even more because she saw how much like I loved holding you.
That's adorable. Okay, so and then I'll give my answer. When did you first realize, like, obviously you were a teen parent, and that at the time when you had me, and I think still now, had a lot of, stereotypes and a lot of like stigma around it.
Sure.
But when did you really feel like socially, like when I was in school and stuff like that, that you were like young for a parent?
Yeah. So, I mean, early on it was really strange. Right. And the really nice part is looking back now, I wouldn't change things because the relationship that we have and the opportunity that we have to like do so much together is so important to me that like all of the early kind of struggle piece, I just look at and don't really get that mad about. I just realized like it wasn't ever us, it was them. But like they tried to put us in, they were like, oh, you should go to these like young parent support groups. But the young parents were like still 6 or 7 years older than us. So they really weren't young or teen parents. And your mother and I were still together, which isn't, again, an anomaly for teen parents. And so, I think where it really struck me was when you were little, your mother stayed home with you and I worked multiple jobs. And so when you finally got to school and we interacted with other parents more, like when you were little, you stayed home and you did things with your mother and you did things with your grandparents and you did things with my parents and your mother's parents. And you were very active as a small infant and toddler. Once you got to school, I think that was more like where, kind of society takes over in terms of the interactions that you start to have. And it really became interesting to us because we would typically invite your entire class to a birthday party. Mm-hmm. And I think it was your first grade class. We invited the entire class and parents came and dropped their kids off and left. Like they didn't socialize. And it was really kind of strange to us because, we thought like, oh, this will be a good way for you to get to know other kids. And this will be a good way for us to get to know some of the other parents. And it was just really apparent at that point that I was going to just say no pun intended. I think it was apparent to us that we were so much younger than the other parents by 10 or 15 or in some cases like 20 years because there were old parents mixed in with us that the folks just they just didn't know how to relate to us. So they, instead of attempting to get to know us, they just stayed within their comfort zone. And I think that was the first part where we realized like, oh, we're going to be kind of alone in this. And the harder part too was we had our friends who were still 18 and 19 and 20 years old who essentially just were doing what 18, 19 and 20-year-olds do, which is going out and having a good time. And like, we were parents. So we were in this sort of no man's land. So what about you? Where was it for you? Like, when did it become apparent? Like, oh man, my parents are so much younger than everybody else's parents.
I think I always kind of realized it, but I think it was really when I started going to other friends' houses. Like, you guys always instilled in me, like, be polite and be social and say thank you and all these things. But like, I would go over to friends' houses and you guys were just always engaged and involved. Like, we would usually do activities like go to the zoo with friends or go to camp with friends or go on a walk or picnics or the pool. And with other friends' parents, it would be like, okay, kids, hang out in like your bedroom and like we'll cook dinner and then you can't hang out past 8 because we're going to bed because we're like 60. I think too, like there was something really jarring about realizing my grandparents were the age of most of my friends' parents. So if Omar or Papa Ken were taking me places, my grandparents, on my mom's side, were taking me places like when we lived in Minnesota, oftentimes people would be like, oh my gosh, like your mom and dad like are so nice or whatever. And I'd be
Right.
like, oh, and those are my grandparents. And then people are like, oh, weird. So I think it was just kind of always woven into the life I was living. And then especially as I got older, it became like, oh, Celia's like the cool parents. Like Celia's parents will like meet us at the mall and like take us out, or Celia's parents will like drive us places, or Celia's parents will like pick us up if we go somewhere late, like a movie or like an 18 and up night at like a drag show. Like you guys were just always kind of doing things that I felt like my other friends' parents, if they were older, weren't really willing to do, or were much more rigid about like, no, we won't pick you up, like find your own other way home, or no, you can't go do that.
Sure. Yeah, I think some of the fun for me was, I think once you got to the point where you were in high school and we would have like, in middle school we started like, you know, daddy daughter dates before they were a thing on the internet, right? Like we would just, because I worked so much, we wanted to find time for like us to go do things. And, you know, your mother would just say like, hey, I'm going to go do this. Like, why don't you guys go, you know, play mini golf, or get you guys, like you said, go to the zoo, or we'll go get coffee. And we would, you know, go to a coffee shop and get drinks, and we would just like hang out together.
You know, it's funny. This is kind of a sidebar, but you make fun of me, or you tell me to stop spending so much money on coffee now as like a young woman, and honestly since like high school, but it's kind of your fault. You got me really into iced coffee. Like it started with the caramel macchiatos because I was like, ew, coffee is gross. And then you were like, you might like this. And then I was like, uh-oh, I really like that. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately, that, you know, part of the father-daughter experience is passing down your caffeine addiction.
I mean, I'll take some blame for it, but I think
you can take all the blame.
No, I think I'm going to blame you, saying like in college that every day you did like a hard workout in rowing, you were like, I deserve a treaty.
Yeah,
I'm gonna go to Dunkin'.
You can't put Dunkin' Donuts on the route home for a college. Dunkin' is cheap. Anyway,
we digress. But I think those evolved into when I worked from home and you went to school in downtown St. Paul. You had essentially an open campus. Your high school was almost like a mini college campus. You had
absolutely.
multiple buildings. You went across to different
open
places.
Lunch. We had a lunchroom eventually, but like
sure. But for the most part, when I would come and have lunch with you or hang out with your friends or do any of those things, like I'd come and meet you for lunch or have coffee. There's a Starbucks nearby. There was it Dunn Brothers on the corner? What was the one on the corner?
Yeah, oh gosh, I miss Dunn Brothers.
The big Dunn Brothers.
Not as good as Caribou. But.
So there's the big Dunn Brothers on the corner, and then there's the Eco Lab, right?
With the food court,
right?
Getting
the food
that
court,
like $3 pizza that was so greasy but so good.
New York style, like the proper type of pizza.
Very good.
I think it was going there and then realizing that I think you had pointed it out that like your mother and I became like pseudo sort of celebrities.
Oh, and you still maintain that status. Even now, I'm almost 25, and my friends are still like, your parents are young? They'll like pull up my Instagram and be like, there's no way. Like the other night I was over at my friend's house watching Fellowship of the Ring, and my friend Matt was like, I was looking, like my girlfriend and I were like looking at your social media account, and she was like, there's no, because I haven't met her. She's somewhere else right now.
Sure.
That sounds so weird. She has a job elsewhere. They're doing long distance. Anyway,
long distance
they're
relationship.
looking at like the profile, and he was like, you know, like just like the rest of us, she was like, there's no way those are her parents. And I was like, I know. It's funny because like when somebody's like, no, they're not, those aren't your parents. And when after you tell them, you can't, there's nowhere to go from there. It's just like a weird stagnation in a conversation, because it's just like, well, you can keep denying it, but they definitely are.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I'm just lying. I've just like adopted these people to becoming like my outside life parents. And I mean, we definitely do that because I think when you find other people in your life, there are the families of choice where you adopt people into your family, but it's like, no, these are like legitimately my families. And I think
well, I do think people think that you guys are my like 40, like, well, honestly, I think most of my friends think you're in your 30s, first of all, one, and two, yeah, like mid to late, but like 30s still.
I'll take anything. I'll take anything sub 40. If it's 39, I will still take it.
I have a lot of friends in their 30s that I think when they've met you guys are like, oh, these are just your other cool older friends who like act like your parents. And I'm like, they are unfortunately actually my parents.
No, fortunately.
Fortunately,
not
I'm sorry.
Unfortunately.
Yes. Unfortunately for my friends who think you guys are just like young, hip 30-somethings.
Yeah, so I think, kind of so building off of the idea of like where we started and then like when we came to the realization that this was, obviously we knew it was outside the norm, but then finding out like, okay, where are the, kind of where are the benefits and where are the positives behind this? I think it really became apparent because like we would just, I think when you were younger, we would take you around to do everything that we would do. We'd expose you to everything that like we were interested in. And then eventually when you were interested in doing things, we would say like, yeah, let's go ahead and go do that. Or to your point, you're like, hey, I'm going to go to this drag show. My friends and I need a ride. Will somebody pick us up? And it was always a no-brainer for me that I would always be like, yeah, let me do this. But I think one of the other really funny things about having a young child is when you got to the point where you could drive, our friends started to realize the benefit of us also being young parents, which was, oh, Celia can babysit.
Yeah. I thought you were going to go into the weird side of being young now, because I feel like we
can get there, but like talk about the fact when you got to the point where you were like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm 16. I can drive. I can start to babysit.
I feel like you covered the topic.
Well, I just think I think it's fun because we had friends who were willing to bribe you like over the top in order.
I don't have anything to add to that. I love you, but
that's fine. So what were you going to say?
No, where I thought you were going was the other side of it, like going from how we got here, like when we realized, and then now. What I was going to say is I also realized where I felt like a lot of my friends could still like hold hands or link arms or like hug and be like affectionate with their older parents like in public, because it's like, oh, like a kid like being affectionate with their parents. I feel obviously I still like give you guys hugs and stuff, but like it stopped a lot earlier because it became like, oh, weird. Like, is that your girlfriend? Even with my grandfather, like at times, like in Minnesota when he would like, which is so gross, so like absolutely vile. But like people would be like, oh, your girlfriend, or like you'd get stares because I'd be like holding hands with you like in public when I was like a teenager, or like when I was younger, like starting to become a teenager rather, right at that weird cusp of you were still in your 20s basically, or like early 30s, and I was like almost 13 or 14, where it's like you're kind of starting to fall out of that like affection with your parents anyway, like in that kind of way. But I feel like a lot younger, I was aware of like, oh, weird, like people who have no idea who we are do not think like this is my dad. They're like, who's that guy with that young girl?
Yeah, I think I think to your point, I think it's also good to point out the fact that not only are we close in age, and not only was, before I could grow a beard, I was even more baby faced when you were younger. But I think the other piece of it too is, I'm 6'4", so I'm not a small person. Like I'm pretty tall, and like you are 6'1". So as you got older, especially as you got into your, middle to older teenage years and then on to college, like you've always looked older than your age, I think. So I think that's part of it where it starts to throw people off. And so it is I think you do, like to your point, even now when we go out, I mean, it's happened a couple of times. We took an improv class together, and
everyone thought we were married, which I feel like we should table the full story because that's just like a whole hoot.
Correct.
For another time. But basically we were revealed like after knowing these people for like 4+ weeks and we finally go to happy hour, that they all think we're a married couple.
Even though we said in the very first
Even though
episode,
we very explicitly in our introductions were like, this is my dad. I'm taking my dad to do improv. I've done improv, but I wanted to do it with my dad. My mom made us come do this to bond with each other.
Yeah.
And
this was a Christmas gift. My wife bought this for me and my daughter to take together.
Yeah, I guess everyone just had like loud circus music playing in their ears when we said that. But
it was early on, and I guess because it was early in improv, they hadn't learned to listen.
Well, I feel like I was gonna say people are like nervous, but sure. But anyway, yeah, I think it's funny now. Like when the three of us go out, you, me, and mom, it's often like separate checks, together or separate.
Yeah. How would you like to pay?
How would you like to pay?
Yeah.
How are we splitting this? Who's who? And then you're like, they're mine.
They're mine.
And
yeah.
People always give you like you love to say that, but people always give you a weird,
they're both
weird
look.
look.
They're both mine.
And they're like, oh.
It's because you and your mother look like, a lot of people say you and your mother look like sisters. So now it becomes like,
okay, people say that, but I don't think that's really true in that like mom has like dark hair and very like cut features, and I'm a little more round faced like you, and I'm blonde.
Well, I
dye my hair, but
I always say that you have like my features, but on your mother's bone structure. So you have a lot of my coloring, but you definitely have parts of your mother where you guys.
Yeah, no, alike. I don't disagree. But there was the other day, there was a photo that somebody took of the two of us where I zoomed in and I screenshotted it and I sent it to you and Mom because I was like, in case anybody is ever worried that like you and me and Dad aren't related, show them this picture because we're making an identical expression, and I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, we're both looking in the same direction and laughing.
There's like a TikTok trend that's like, I'm just a femme version of my father, and I was like, it couldn't be me. And then I looked at that picture and I was like,
oh no. No, that's fairly accurate. So. Yeah, I mean, I think we've gotten to the point now where, you know, we're familiar with it. We deal with it. It happens all of the time.
Well, now it's like a big
now
joke.
It's a standing joke. Correct. Mm-hmm. Right. Like our family just has it as a running joke, as a standard joke.
No, and I think it's fun, but I think like, you know, at the end of the day, it's kind of like you said earlier, I wouldn't change or anything now. Like, not that I ever felt like, oh, I wish I'd had older parents. I never really felt that way because I never knew anything different. But like I think about now, I'm like, oh, like I'm so lucky now that I'm like in my like mid 20s and we can travel together and we can do things together and I can help pay for things, or we can go halvesies on stuff, or we can go
nice.
Well, but like I'm just saying, you know, that people with older parents don't do that, but I think like it's nicer where like obviously, you know, like people are like, can your parents really be your friends? And it's like, it's not that we're not friends, because we are, but like you guys are like truly what I think like the purest form of like my parents. Like you are what I expect parents should be. And I think it's been cool having like, I think that really unique bond of like, you guys were so young, so we grew up together. You know, we always say that. Like, we were young together, we'll be middle-aged together, and then we'll be old, and then we'll all die together someday.
Well, I think that's I think that's why this is going to be kind of a fun experience, right? To kind of go through, do these episodes, to talk about some of these things, explore things like, you know, where do we have all similar interests? Like all three of us as a family, where do you and I have similar interests, where, you know, it's just kind of things that you and I can nerd out about. You know, what are the things that you've inherited kind of like in terms of pop culture, or like the things that you like music wise, like what have you kind of taken from both of us, and like what are the things where it's not even just that, but like how are you then giving it back to us? So I think a lot of these things that we can kind of explore and talk about in the future are going to be what makes this fun.
And so I actually think that's a really great place to wrap things up for this week. You know, we kind of covered where we were, how we got here, our feelings on the young father, young daughter experience. You guys, we'll see you next Wednesday when we'll have a whole new, brand new fun topic to talk about. You can find us on social media at FatherDaughterEXP on Instagram and TikTok, and at the Father Daughter Experience on YouTube and wherever you should so listen to your podcasts.
Bye.
Bye.